New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University, a leader in fully accredited in-person and online U.S. college degree programs in the topics we cover here. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Hi, it's Leanne Whitney, guest host at New Thinking Aloud. You are warmly invited to visit transformationandintegration.com to access additional resources that support the journey through deep transformation and to learn more about the ongoing offerings at Center for Transformation and Integration, including our certified training in transformational coaching with an emphasis in somatic integration therapy. I look forward to welcoming you there.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hi, I'm Leanne Whitney, guest host working alongside host Jeffrey Mishlove, co-host Emmy Vadnais, and my other colleagues here at New Thinking Aloud. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Patricia DeYoung to the show. Pat has a Master's of Social Work and a PhD in Philosophy of Education from the University of Toronto. She's a registered clinical social worker in Ontario, Canada, and has been a practitioner of psychotherapy since 1996. She was a founding faculty member of the Toronto Institute for Relational Psychotherapy, where she taught for 25 years. Pat has written 3 books: Relational Psychotherapy, a primer, Understanding and Treating Chronic Shame, Healing Right Brain Relational Trauma, and Shame and Grace, 6 essays on falling apart and becoming whole again. In this episode, Pat and I discuss belonging, the longing to belong, the importance of attunement, relationship, and deep listening. We take a look at chronic shame, how shame is related to narcissism, and contemplate whether shame is at the heart of any cultural complexes. Pat is joining me today from her office in Ontario, and now I will switch over to the internet interview. Hi, Pat. Welcome to the show. Nice to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Oh, you're so welcome. I am looking forward to getting into your expertise on shame. But I'd like to start actually with the discipline of relational psychotherapy. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What it is and what differentiates it from psychoanalysis or any of the other disciplines?
In a sense, it's built into most psychotherapies that the relationship matters a whole lot to kind of what's wrong for somebody, and also like that the relationship with the therapist matters a whole lot to whether the therapy is going to work or not. And relational therapy kind of centers in on that and says, if that relationship matters a whole lot, why is that? How does that work? How can we work with that? But behind that, there's the sort of philosophical, scientific assumption that human beings are fundamentally relational creatures. Well, lots of mammals are, right? That's sort of living in tribes and clans and groups. It's just a part of us. And also developmentally, we need other humans in order to, learn to talk, for example, but also to learn how to be a human being in the world, to learn how to have emotions and regulate emotions and be in relationship with other people. We learn that from other people. And when that doesn't go well, when there's lots of trauma in our early relationships, or emptiness or neglect, which is traumatic in itself, then we don't learn that stuff very well. And we come to some conclusions about who we can be and what's possible. And like the world is scary, or we're not okay, or something like that. And that at the basis of a lot of what's known in our culture and others as mental health issues, neuroses, lots of language for what's wrong. At the basis of that, for a lot of us anyway, is something went really wrong for us and how we learned how to be with other people, what's possible for us with other people in relationships. So that's the relational psychotherapy is building on that presumption that relationship matters so much to our well-being. And if something has gone wrong in that, that needs to be uncovered a bit so that we come to realize, oh, that happened to me, and have a bit of freedom to be able to relate differently. And one of the prime places to test that out is in a therapy relationship with somebody who's willing to explore all that with you and to be in a different kind of relationship with you where you're safer and freer and can find out without a lot of pressure who you are, what you feel.
Yes, creating the safe space in the therapy room. It brings me back, actually. I'm a Jungian-oriented depth psychologist. Jung and Freud, the transference and the countertransference. And so almost like the reenactment in a therapy space of where there was misattunement or where something went afield towards being able to be comfortable in one's body and feeling whole, if you will, or authentic. And
that can take a long time because the expectations that this person is going to be like the model we have in our heads of close people who matter to us. That this person, this therapist person, is going to be kind of the same as that. That's really powerful, much more powerful than we imagine when we first go into therapy, right? Then that transference thing happens. It's like, oh, wow, who is that? Or you don't even think that at first. It just kind of happens, and then you unpack it in the therapy.
Right. The assumption that everybody's going to play out, the assumption that the other relationships that one approaches or experiences will play out the same way, that the same disappointments will arise, or
that's right.
Yes, the same behavioral patterns. Right.
Yeah. You'll be seen as something lesser or something to be kind of apologetic about, or you'll be seen as angry or dangerous, or you'll be seen as whatever, and you end up playing the part. Yeah.
Right. And also what I'm hearing you say is, I'm thinking of interpersonal neurobiology and Dan Siegel's work on the developing mind. Like minds develop in relation to, if not inside of, other minds. So children are born into a family system, so to speak, and their mind develops inside the minds that are already developed, right? So the brain develops, right? The brain isn't fully developed until 25, the cortex, I believe, or early 20s. So we are talking about a relationship between the mind and the brain, because obviously the definitions aren't very clear throughout our disciplines on these things. But if we go with the interpersonal neurobiology, where the brain is really what's in the skull and through the nervous system, so we come into a family system, and maybe you could share more about that. Like, what is attachment, and why do our systems need that attunement?
Someone who's been really influential for me is Alan Shore, who writes about right brain and left brain development. And in my work on shame, I came to realize that probably shame has its roots in something going amiss in right brain development. And right brain development is the sort of emotional, non-linear, non-logical, what an infant or a small child is all about until they start to begin to put sequences of logic together. So if I, as an infant, am like really out of sorts, something's hurting me, I'm upset about something, will there be another who can meet me in that place and help me calm down and become regulated and be back in a comfortable relationship with that person? And an infant, a small child, learns from that the world is a reliable, a safe place, that another person who's in close can be trusted, that emotions aren't something that are going to wipe you out. They can be regulated. And from that place of kind of co-regulation between infant and a small child and a parent, there comes eventually the capacity to self-regulate. And that's all sort of right brain, non-logical, holistic kind of perception of who the other is, who I am, what these emotions are in me, how this all gets held, how the communication happens in body, tone, gesture kinds of ways before language in that sort of logical, making sense way comes online. It's in the kind of right brain connection that secure attachment is built. That's what Alan Shore has to say, and it's convincing.
Yes, I'm a fan of Alan Shore as well. So again, we're back to this idea of embodiment. The body keeps the score, what's being transmitted in a very embodied way, right? So when bottom up, what's coming from our gut or our heart up into the right hemisphere, that's being transmitted again within the family system way before a child would ever be able to put words to it or have a concept around, oh, this was the experience I had. It just becomes the experience, if you will.
That's right.
What is so Alan Shore and affect or affective neuroscience even, do you have a definition of affect that you work with?
It's a little more basic than emotion. It's got sort of surges to it. There's a vitality affect versus categorical affect. That goes back to the other Dan, what's his name? The Interpersonal World of the Infant, that book. I can't pull it in right now. Anyway, that working again with very small people, with infants, it's not clear that they're sad or they're angry or they're afraid. But they have surges of emotion, right? That have got arousal and then quiet in them. That's affect. It's sort of the stirred upness and the crescendo and the decrescendo. But then there are categorical affects also, like mad, sad, glad, and afraid, kind of those, and ashamed, or what else is in there. But anyway, that have different colors that show differently on a face. You can see sometimes that an infant or a small child is full of rage or full of fear, right? They do differentiate some. On the whole, though, when you talk about grown-ups and people in therapy, right, affect and emotion are kind of interchangeable terms.
They are. That's why I was asking what your personal reference was to it. In depth psychology, we often think of it as that which is the visible, the visible aspects of feeling. So it's what pops through to the other side, what the other people can see, the rage, yes, or the joy.
Your face signals affect, your body language signals affect, and the emotion is more inside of you. Is that kind of
yes, yes, and again, with Dan Siegel, emotion is sort of the overarching definition for the feeling would be what's happening inside, and the affect being what pops through to the outside. So again, there's no consistency across disciplines on what the definition is, and I think that speaks to the culture at large that we're still actually understanding what human emotion is and the enormous role it plays in whether we are able to develop authentically, or if I could use the term empowered. Would you agree with that? Like where we are in 2024 is really still coming towards the understanding, which is why you wrote your book even.
That there's so much that we do that's driven by emotions that we're not aware of.
Right.
That it's not easy to have a conversation in public arenas about what emotional things are driving decisions, for example. That a lot of people end up in therapist's office because they didn't have much help when they were growing up, learning how to identify and kind of make friends with, or contain, or express their emotions appropriately, right?
Right. So emotions were hidden in the culture. And this is what I mean. Like they maybe only in the 90s, even though Freud and Jung were all about affect. When it comes to perhaps neuroscience or other disciplines, perhaps it wasn't until the 1990s when emotions really started to be taken more seriously scientifically. So we're still in the middle of that process of understanding within the Euro-American culture just how important emotion is to our beingness.
That's right. I mean, it's always there. Everybody's having emotion kind of all the time, whether they think about it or not, or whether they have any idea what's going on or not, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. So let's move into ideas of shame now. I'm a big fan of both John Bradshaw's work as well as David Hawkins, in addition to your book and your work, which I feel really adds a lot to the literature. But this idea where shame being a master emotion, or that which can be excessively hidden. So if we talk about emotions in the population writ large, not necessarily getting enough air or understanding yet in the development of Euro-American culture, shame perhaps the nadir or the most hidden, the master emotion that's going to fall to the bottom of the vortex and be hidden underneath the fear and the rage and perhaps everything else.
Shame itself as an emotion is not a bad thing, in that when we do something that hurts somebody else, we can feel guilty about it in that sort of, this is the wrong I did, but we can also feel ashamed, like something's broken between me and the other, and I need to fix that. I'd like to fix that. And that is an ethical kind of moment. It's an ethical emotion. Shame in itself, telling us right from wrong, telling us connection from disconnection, is valuable. The chronic shame that I've been writing about for a long time and thinking about for a long time is different from that, in that what ordinary, everyday ethical shame does, it helps us repair. It helps us feel what the break is, and it helps us move toward repair with another person. Chronic shame is a ongoing, feeling like it's irreparable state of brokenness between self and other that never got repaired in the little times of childhood, and then on doesn't get repaired. And the brokenness is between ourselves and the other, and it's between ourselves and ourselves. And the process of therapy, the kind of therapy that I believe in, is going to the roots of that and beginning to reintegrate the connection between our emotional selves and our part of ourselves that don't want that emotional selves. And then also being able to learn how to be in the world with people in a non-defensive, non-broken, disconnected kind of way, finding the connection back. It becomes hidden, I think, just because it is so painful and so kind of ugly to feel. And it's about yourself, right? Usually there's something wrong with me. And who wants to walk around in the world wearing that? Even kind of knowing very much that that's what you feel about yourself. Like, of course it gets hidden. People want to feel powerful. People want to feel like winners. Like, to be a loser is a terrible thing. People want to feel like they matter. And shame has got a lot of not mattering to it. That kind of feeling. So it just, there's something about shame that is fundamentally about disconnection, about not being connected to other people in a way that helps sustain your sense of well-being. And since that disconnection is a part of it, you did get disconnected from the shame as well. It's not sort of coming through on any channel.
Yeah, is there an example you can use? So we're talking about how shame is developed relationally. Um, is there an example? I don't know if you have a client example or um, how in the relationship between a child and the primary caregiver, um, what is splitting, if you will? The attunement isn't happening, but maybe you could take us through an example of a process of how shame actually starts.
Somebody I can think of that's kind of paradigmatic of shame that happens in not an acutely traumatic kind of way, but say a little girl is born in a family and she's the third child, um, and her mom is pretty overburdened with having a third child. Her eldest brother has some kind of anger issues that take up a lot of space in the family. And there's something that this infant or small child experiences of, my mother is just not interested in me. She's just kind of gone. When I reach out, she turns away. She's not got time for me. Not consciously thinking that, but when the client is in therapy with me and thinks back to, like, knows her current history with her parents and with herself, thinks and knows kind of the family history, thinks that must have been what happened, because that's what feels right to me when I think about that whole gestalt of what my childhood and infancy must have been, and has some memories that go with that. From that place of there's nobody there and I don't matter, her recourse is to go inside and to shut out the face of the mom and eventually the faces of the other people in her family, because she's not getting that message of mattering, of being seen from anybody. And so she spends a lot of time alone. She spends a lot of time with TV. She goes to school and feeling like she doesn't matter and not having someone to help her, look after her, like wearing the right clothes and making sure her hair is washed and, that she looks nice. It gets replicated in being at school and being kind of the kid that other people bully, make fun of a bit. And that feeling of there's something wrong with me and I don't matter gets kind of nailed down in childhood and going into adolescence. And nobody in her family ever tried to shame her, right? Nobody ever said to her, you're bad, you're wrong, you're an ugly kid, it was just the lack of response, or the response that came around certain kinds of behaviors that were maybe prescribed of what it meant to be a good girl. So some of that would have been an alternate kind of a false self to develop. And then as she moves into adulthood, there's kind of no grounding of, I am seen by the other, I matter in the other's eyes, I'm okay. Just that basic okayness inside is missing. She doesn't exactly know that history has caused this situation. She's living as an adult or a young adult in the expectation, the conviction that there's something wrong with her. She's doing something wrong. She doesn't know how to be with people. That kind of shame at a deep level governs her world while she goes on getting an education, getting a bachelor's degree, eventually going on to become a lawyer. Like, you can build a whole life that works more or less around that kind of emptiness inside and that sense of, I don't know how to be in the world. I can't connect with people. There's something fundamentally wrong with me, icky about me, in myself. I don't know how to talk about it. I don't know how to get past it. And In her case, it shows up then as a combination of depression and anxiety, with a depression being the strongest theme. It doesn't have to go that way, but depending on somebody's temperament, it goes in different ways. So that deep level, I'm not okay, there's something wrong with me, can also get covered over by a lot of activity and performativity in the world.
Yeah, right. The adaptability, how you learn to adapt and survive. There's a survival element to it. And I don't know if this brings us into polyvagal theory or some sort of trauma-informed theory about maybe the fight or flight response gets chronically turned on, or some kind of hypo, the depression, or there's like a shutdownness. Is that true across? So if there's, I don't know if we want to say a spectrum of injury, right? We have distress perhaps on one end, extreme distress, all the way up to trauma. That ability to come to know oneself, either through probably through a therapeutic process, to realign, if possible, into some form of authenticity. Would you say a majority of the clients, regardless of that distress to trauma spectrum, are looking at some kind of nervous system dysregulation? That they would either be in some sort of fight or flight, or
freeze,
or freeze,
or fawn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that it's possible to look at disorders of the self from the perspective of nervous system dysregulation, and that to go back to what I was talking about at the very beginning, the sort of right brain development has to do with having a regulating other that helps you learn how to regulate your own nervous system. And the worse the trauma, the less present the other, or the more dysregulating the other, the less capacity someone has developed to self-regulate or co-regulate with a friendly, available other, right? So in situations of very severe trauma, that capacity to regulate is really blown out of the water. And it's a struggle, like a daily struggle for folks to be able to manage what's happening in their emotions. And they feel like kind of all alone with it, because they have been all alone with it. And there's not sort of an internalized regulating other for them as there is for other people. But with folks who are further, if we use the spectrum idea, we're more in the middle, not so damaged, didn't have such a hard time. They've been in families or with others who've helped them learn how to regulate by sort of bringing thought to the situation, or bringing rules to the situation, or they maybe don't have somebody in close in a kind way to have helped them learn to regulate without the shame. So the shame is still there. So they're kind of alone at a deep place with whatever's happening for them emotionally, but they've been contained well enough in relationships, primary relationships, to be able to sort of like use your words, right, around emotion. Do something to prove that you're worth something, like be really good at school, or be really good on the basketball court, or something like that. Put yourself out there. And it is an empowerment, but if the level of shame is still under there, it's kind of a cover as well. And, across as we move further along to sort of normal neurotic status, where we would like to all live, where we are able to manage our own emotions pretty well and feel pretty comfortable in life, there are still those pockets, right, where you're covering over some icky feeling about yourself, some insecurity, something like that. And in that moment, there's some affect dysregulation, right? You have to regulate yourself, or find a friend who's going to talk to you and help you regulate what's happening.
Yes, and maybe we could even give a definition of regulation. Like, what are we meaning by that? What is emotional regulation?
So at the far end, or what you're trying to regulate, what an infant gets just overwhelmed by emotion, right? It's like, I feel horrible, I'm going to scream. And somebody comes and kind of rocks you and makes you feel better, and it calms down. And that's a very simple, crescendo, decrescendo. And then you're two and you're really, really mad about something and you're kicking and screaming, and somebody comes and holds you and talks to you like, oh, you're so angry right now. What made you so angry? And kind of brings it down, brings it back to a part of yourself and not something that owns you, right? I have my emotions rather than being wiped out by some flood of emotion, something that overwhelms. So regulation is taking it, I think, from overwhelm to manageable, to I'm having this feeling, I don't like it, or I do like it, but whatever. But it belongs to me. I can think about it and communicate it to somebody. And in the communication, it just becomes what it is, not an overwhelming flood.
I'm safe with it. Like, I'm safe with this, and I can breathe, and I can take a moment of space and ground myself. And
if I'm sad, I can cry, and that's okay, because sadness comes and sadness goes. Or if I'm afraid, I can say I'm afraid and be afraid, and then find some way to not be so afraid. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Or if I'm mad, I can say what I'm mad about, and someone will hear me, and maybe something can change. So emotion as information, emotion as a useful part of life, right? That keeps the connections going and the disconnections fixed and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's such a valuable point there, in the ability to stay connected with the anger or with the intensity of the emotion, and not have to like blow the room out with rage. Or there is what we're talking about here is, in the development of the capacity to regulate, relationship is maintained. So emotion isn't overpowering the system, and therefore having to overpower the room or the other relationships.
That's right. And it works the other way around too, that you learn how to regulate emotion when relationship is maintained. It's the maintaining of that relationship. Even in our adult lives with the people who are close to us, if we can maintain a relationship with them while we're going through some emotion and talk about it, that's co-regulation, right? And then the other side of that is that as we regulate, we don't have to blow the room out with our rage, or disappear with our sadness, or be terrified in a corner with our fear, right?
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. And in families or in people where regulation wasn't learned, the adaptation, a lot of times that's, well, if it's not ubiquitous underneath addiction. So that's why someone grabs for alcohol or painkillers, or because the regulation hasn't been learned. And one way of going about regulating is to find the substance or find the sex, or yes.
Yep, exactly. Or the addictive behavior, right? You can play video games to self-regulate for sure. Or lots of different things. You can go shopping. You can go running for hours at a time. All kinds of things that people, and they're better or worse solutions to the problem of dysregulation, right? More or less destructive.
Right. Workaholism is, I mean,
sure.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It can still bury the shame. It can still bury the shame, right?
And have a fairly good result. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But the person still perhaps knows deep down there's an authenticity that isn't able to be rooted into, that there's something that's still hidden and unexpressed, even if they can't name it as shame.
Right. That's right. That there's something broken in their relationship or to themselves that is parallel to some kind of not really being known feeling known and connected with the other. There's a kind of an isolation and a stranger to oneself kind of feeling. That's the opposite of what we're talking about.
Right. Now, how pervasive would you say shame is in our culture? I mean, if we look at addiction,
Right.
or we haven't gotten into this yet, and I'd like to, the relationship between narcissism and shame. If you look at, even if it's just sort of narcissistic tendencies, not necessarily having to go through the DSM and diagnose somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, but the tendencies towards narcissism, or also even borderline personalities. How pervasive, do you have a sense? I don't know if there's any literature out there on this, but do you have a sense of how pervasive shame might be within the culture?
I don't know of any studies about this either. I guess I would answer that with a question to myself, like how pervasive is it how pervasive is loneliness, that sense of deep aloneness in our culture? How well do parents know how to communicate? Or maybe it's not a sense of even now, it's how much time do parents have? Or how well do early childhood educators know how to respond to the emotional needs of children, right? And then as kids grow up, how much time is spent in school curriculums about learning how to be in relationships, right? Learning how to resolve conflict, learning how to be a good human with other human beings. It's kind of like you're on your own to learn that stuff in our culture. And so you find your alternate ways to matter, to be important, to win, to succeed. In this culture in particular, it's anti-shame. Like the language about empowerment can sometimes be like wearing t-shirts that say no shame on the front, right? Which is counterproductive around the real shame that so many people carry. Yeah?
Well, that begs the question for me is, are we a shame-based culture in a way that, I'll use these terms very gently, right? For the conversation, but the capitalism, the economy, the thing that has to keep moving, does it have a predatory nature to it? So there is no time left in families, which doesn't allow the level of attunement that's potentially very necessary, is very necessary, not potentially very necessary, so is the culture, and again, this is I'm just gently dropping this in some kind of alchemical cauldron. I'm not saying this is the case, but I have to say that I do wonder, and especially when you say something like anti-shame, it's that hidden within the cultural complex. So in Jungian psychology, we talk about personal complexes, which have affect at their core. But in our psychology, we also have cultural complexes where the whole culture could have something in their psyche, some psychic pattern, if you will, that has common images and themes, with a central affect at its core. And I can't help but wonder if it's possible that it's sitting inside the culture in a way that the culture isn't able to acknowledge. And then the question becomes why? What is the culture running towards or running from?
Well, the capitalist culture is running on the principle of there are winners and there are losers, right? Somebody's got to be at the top. It's a pyramid kind of setup. Are we a shame-based culture? I think we are a winners and losers-based culture. We're a maximize profit kind of culture, get what you can kind of culture. So it's not Well, and the winners can look down on the losers, and there can be some actual shame inculcated in that way. But shame is more the after effect, right? The underside, the what's not talked about in a culture where what matters is to get to the top. What matters is to make as much profit as you can or money as you can, have the most toys, all of those kind of tropes for how this culture works.
Right. So you always want to look for what's in the shadow. So if this is the thing that's talked about, then what is the very thing that isn't being talked about? And how are those two things related?
Right.
And if materialism, the rush towards materialism, or of course we don't print money anymore, but printed dollar bills are also very abstract. You take down a tree, which is the very thing you need to breathe and to have good air quality, and you put the value in something that becomes very abstract instead of the very real embodied need of what it means to be alive. So are we dancing around that idea? What's talked about as the materialism, and is that the substitute for the real emotional connection? Again, I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but in this conversation, I
totally go with you there and expand it to the trees and the earth and the being a part of in a kind of horizontal kind of way, being a part or a circular kind of circles of relationship, right? Rather than top-down kind of hierarchical power over relations. I think that a hierarchical power over situation does set itself up much more for shame when you are left behind in the connection, when the connection doesn't happen, when the caring for each other, when the being responsible for each other, and all the beings on the planet kind of becomes like not something you think about. Then huge swaths of what it means to be human on the planet are just forgotten about. But that hurts the humans, right? Even the humans who are winning, right? They show the signs of really not being okay. Not being calm and happy and connected in sort of that ventral vagal, to play with polyvagal theory for a minute, that openness to each other that deep down we all want, but is so often just not safe. Even in our families of origin, if somebody's not there to be open to us in response, and so much less in a general culture that isn't about nurturing, right? Or about affirming the value of every human being, or understanding emotionally where people are coming from. Like, who actually cares about that stuff, right? In our culture, except some therapists. No, that's not fair. There are a lot of folks who sense that something's wrong and who try to talk about it. And I have my angle for trying to talk about it. Yeah.
Yes, that sensing that something is wrong. And again, I do want to get to this idea of narcissism and shame and how they're interconnected. But ideas of belonging came up for me in how you were describing those circles of care, or the circles. I don't think you used the term belonging, but it's that. It's we belong. That's the authenticity, if not the empowerment as well, that the mind belongs in the body, belongs on the earth, and we belong to each other. It's really just concentric circles kind of going out. And when the feeling of belonging, that there's nurturing care, that I'm seen, that I'm soothed, that I'm safe as a human. Again, if workaholism is one potential strategy to heal that wounding of belonging, or
to rise above it anyway.
Yeah. Right. To rise above it. There you go. Not to heal it. Very good. Yeah. Good catch there. then again, going back to the cultural piece, if the nurturance isn't seen from the top down within the cultural systems, do we want to question who it is that we put into power, or how we see the engagement of power, of the engagement of politics? And again, perhaps we are already doing this, but just to kind of name it in the way from the shame dialogue. If this thing is being very hidden in the cultural dialogue, is it possible that the people we elevate into some of the top positions of power are the very people that could potentially be covering up dysregulation and shame?
Yeah, for sure. Or not covering up, right? Like, it could just be a shamelessness about it, which is a funny kind of cover for a real shame that is underneath. And there's a way to speak for compassion and connection that belongs in political discourse, I believe. It's one of the most important things from my perspective to be accountable for in politics, in social justice, right? Like, who's looking after? And how are we looking after? How are we communally responsible for each other? And how do our politics, how do our political decisions and structures reflect that?
And this reminds me just of the ideas of projection. I mean, as you said, like, we're not taught in schools about emotional regulation. We're actually not taught mental health. So that which we do not know about ourselves will be projected out onto another. And again, we could say this is what's happening in the family system from the early days. If it's a dysregulated other as a primary caregiver, there's going to be, the projection for sure in the household, unmetabolized psychic information that the child then, it's like a big enigma. The child's trying to develop within the system. There's no way they're going to figure it out that young. In the same in the culture, we're trying to digest the unnamed. And how do we best approach that big question?
Yes, it's a huge question. Yes. And if people are going to project their anger and disgruntlement and sense of grievance, they're just going to project that, then it's not going to get it. The things that they're angry and disgruntled and grieved about, it's not going to get attended to, right? In a family system, if a kid grows up really upset and angry and feeling uncared for and hiding some really deep shame because of how they were treated by a mom or a dad, they can go out and act like that mom or dad to try to make themselves feel better, right? Well, I'll be in power then. It's hard sometimes for people to say, I want something different than what I grew up with. And it's possible for it to be different. It's really hard. Sometimes their lives have to just crash before they can come to therapy and say, hey, this that I've learned doesn't work. I need something different.
100%, yes. And is it possible also people are on a track where they don't even know to ask for help, and they're going to crash a whole system because they rose to a place of power, and they're so out of touch with actually what's going on in their deep inner world that they'll crash a whole community or
and take the community with them, with all of the projections that match wherever it is that they're going.
Right. Right, 100%. Well, let's talk about shame and narcissism if we can. How are those two things related? So, again, we're talking about this idea that shame can be very hidden, lots of personality characteristics, if you will. I don't know if you want to call it structures, personality aspects, get built over that shame. With narcissism, oftentimes being the hard nut around that very vulnerable. I think we want to name that too. That the shame is developed because of vulnerability. That there was an emotional vulnerability in the not being seen, in the misattunement. Yes, can you explore for us how are shame and narcissism?
Yeah. For me, narcissism and following self-psychology is not in itself a kind of bad word. Narcissism is about our relationship with our sense of self. It's kind of about our sense of self, whether it's feeling healthy and coherent and kind of okay or not. If you've got a lot of shame going on inside, you're not going to feel very good about yourself in some deep place. And then you've got to compensate for that. And the things that, DSM-ish wise or in therapy speak, we call narcissism, are different ways to try to feel good about yourself when you haven't got much solid inside, when it's kind of Swiss cheese inside. And so that there are different forms of it. Right? There's that sort of grandiose narcissism that we recognize. People are self-important and blowing their own horn and don't have much time or empathy for anybody else. That's maybe that's the one that gets tagged narcissistic personality disorder, that sort of complete self-absorption. But you can also be quite self-absorbed one can be in a very self-abnegating kind of way, a kind of needing to please all the time, needing to get feedback all the time that you're okay, because you don't know that from the inside. That's a more sort of passive, depressive kind of narcissism, sort of a down-regulating kind. There's a kind of narcissism that has no idea that there's any shame underneath that, because the dissociation that goes along with shame is so complete, that goes along with all kinds of shame, but in this case is so complete that there's no sense that I would ever feel like I'm not okay inside, because I have such a strong defense against that and such a way of being powerful or kind of watertight in the world. That's a kind of narcissism that you would probably recognize as narcissism in the world also. The watertight kind of, no flies on me. Nothing's wrong with me at all. The rest of you folks maybe, but I'm fine.
Just to make this really applicable for, our audience who aren't therapists, and are there signs, like if narcissism is something that's proliferating in the culture?
There's a lot more rigidity in a more narcissistic structure, that you've got to be tight about who you are and protect yourself against any kind of criticism, what you feel as criticism anyway. But you've got to keep your story straight, right? You got to be on top of it. You got to be empowered, no shame kind of thing. Different degrees of rigidity. And I suppose what I'm saying, you could also think, so how do I notice that in other people, right? The people that I know who are close to me. And it's interesting. I think most of us feel more comfortable with people who are more able to be fallible and real and vulnerable with us. That sort of narcissistic tightness and needing us to approve of them or to admire them or to not call them to account for anything. They're needing to be right or whatever, that's not as comfortable to be with. That's another way to think about it from over on this side of the interaction, of kind of who is a little kind of, you got to handle with kid gloves a little bit, right? Something could go off that could be suddenly really hurt by something we say when we didn't mean it, and you can't work it through with them.
I love that you brought up the rigidity. And again, to reference back to interpersonal neurobiology, there's two things that came up for me while you were saying that we want to be in the flow of integration. That's where mental health is in that flow. And we don't want to bank up on rigidity or chaos. And that's a good indicator, perhaps, again, just for like general take homes for people, like, who are in your immediate environment do you see they're in the flow of integration and they don't have a lot of rigidity in their life, or on the other side of it, or chaos, or sometimes both rigidity and chaos. They can be in the flow. There's a flexibility and adaptability, a general coherence, which maybe we could speak about. And then also you said the empathy, which again, in that system of thought, the interpersonal neurobiology, integration made visible is kindness and compassion. So this, integration being that the wholeness is being felt, that regardless of what was laid down in the initial patterning, maybe there's new neural pathways that have been created, and there's just a wholeness throughout it all. So I don't know if there's anything to speak to that, either the integration, wholeness, or coherence.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you said that, I know that Siegel language, right? There's the chaos here, there's the rigidity here, and there's this zone in the middle of integration. And I thought when you were saying that, oh yes, the chaos is the dysregulated affect, right? And the rigidity is when you haven't got the help, the being with, to co-regulate with somebody, to know that affect is integratable, that you can make it a part of yourself. We don't learn that on our own, right? And what often happens is we don't learn that in that middle space, that sort of deep groove of connection. All we've got left is rigidity, right? You either be in the chaos or you be in the rigidity. So chaos, unmitigated in some way inside, is kind of the shame place. And rigidity is the clamp down, right? The cure for the shame that we do by ourselves. So the rigidity is, in my view, what I was just saying was rigidity is kind of the narcissism and chaos is kind of the shame. And you can just go back and forth between those unless you get to hang out in the middle space. And you need other people to be able to learn how to hang out in the middle space. You need other people when you're little. You need other people in your primary and friend relationships to co-regulate, to learn how to be okay with other people's emotions and your own emotions, and to make sense of them and to make a world of connection and relationality there. And that's where you go in the kind of therapy I do anyway. That's where you go when you hang out with your therapist, is to that middle space so that you can give up some of your rigidity and tame some of the chaos, right? Bring the chaos down into that place of, here we are together. This is what you're feeling. Let's talk about it. And you don't have to go to that rigid performative place to make it better.
Yeah, I think it's a really great way to language it. And as Dan Siegel says, like, I think he went through the DSM and looked at, all the diagnoses, and it was either chaos, and rigidity. It really is a very simple, in the best kind of way, for lay people who haven't studied therapy or mental health. And because we don't, at least in the US, we don't teach mental health. I don't know if other cultures around the world do. It's nice, I think, for people to have these almost simple takeaways to, how do I get myself? And again, that this idea of coherence or integration. Why is it important? What do those words mean for you in your practice, or even just how you relate to those words yourself? Wholeness, integration, possibly even coherence.
To be able to feel the integration of your emotional experiences throughout your life into your selfhood, right? Those things happened to me. I felt this or that or the other about them. I can now bring them in and say, oh, that's me. Even when what I remember is traumatic or sad or rageful inducing, I bring it in and I am here now. Right? To be able to have that sense of I am here now, and then beyond that, I am okay. I am solid. I am full of meaning. I am a person. I don't know how to talk about what that means beyond what I've just said. It's just kind of, there's a spirituality about it even, right?
I'd love you to share that. Yes. Because in some sense, hidden shame is the very opposite of self-realization. The very opposite. I mean, this would be David Hawkins' brilliant body of work, Transcending the Levels of Consciousness. Again, it's at the bottom of the vortex. It's everything that awareness, it sucks. Awareness is hidden. It's not in consciousness. It's the opposite of it, if you will. It's the thing that gets hidden that we've already said that we're not aware of. So I would love for you to speak to the spirituality piece and how that moves through you or how you experience it.
So I'm a relational psychotherapist. So I live in just a little bit different tradition than you do, but we can certainly talk with each other and appreciate each other's perspective. For me, the spirituality that I think about is about the power of love in the universe, the power of connection in the universe, the power of joining with others, human others, and feeling a sense of connectedness to the earth, the cosmos, whatever, that is a we-ness about it, within which an individual can feel solid and separate and valuable as a person too. It doesn't negate selfhood at all, but it's selfhood in connection. In connection is where I locate my own spirituality, in the sense of the universe, the power of love in the universe, but that comes right down into the power of love as it's expressed in all of my interactions and relationships in my life. And my hope that that could matter more than greed and hate in the world, right? Which are also, greed and hate are also interpersonal, right? It's taking connection in the opposite direction, in a destructive way. Like, I need to win over you. I hate you. I want because I want, and that means you're not going to have. It's all, in my view, both the good and the bad of what we can call spirituality in the universe. The good and the evil is relationally constructed, or it's about relationship when it works and relationship when it destroys.
I love where you're going with that. The affects are coding for two. You don't even have to make it more multiple, but the positive affects, joy, love, nurturance, are coding for one thing. And then the fear, greed is coding for something else. I love where you're going with all that. And you brought up a really important piece of the relationality, which we've been talking about throughout, but this idea of the differentiation and the linkage. Again, I'm a longtime yogi, and through that system of thought, as it is current day in interpersonal neurobiology, we want to differentiate the parts. They're important, but they're also underlyingly linked. So everything is inherently relational. We neither want enmeshment, nor do we want dissociation. So we don't want the differentiated parts to be so far apart that somehow they can't hear each other or they're no longer in dialogue with each other. But we also don't want this, sure, from the non-dual perspective, consciousness is all there is, but you don't want just this enmeshed everything either. The differentiated pieces are beautiful, and they're beautiful because of love and the relationality. When we can see that the positive affects really code for one kind of particular embodied human experience.
Yep, I do hear what you're saying. Yep. Yeah, it connects.
For our listeners who are perhaps insecurely attached or watching this and starting to question about relationships, is there first steps or ways to soothe the perhaps unsoothed, even though we're in cyberspace right now and not in a room together? But again, this idea of belonging and the longing to belong, and shame being in that milieu of that longing. Is there anything, again, through cyberspace that you could share that might offer soothing? Or
the first thing that came to mind is look around and see who's in your world that you feel somewhat connected to, and talk to that person a little more honestly, a little more deeply about who you are, what makes you happy and what makes you sad, what's going on in the relationship between the two of you. Just connect a little better, a little more genuinely, a little more from your heart with anyone who is available for that connection. And also, I suppose, open your heart to, in a larger sense, the pain that's in the world and what's being done, what could be done to alleviate some of it. To feel like a belonging in the nitty-gritty of your daily life, the connections that can be there, and to open yourself to more a sense of belonging, to humanity, if you want to call it that. Yeah.
beautiful, yeah, belonging to our own humanity and to our collective humanity.
And, I think when people start to try to be a little more genuine in connection with the people around, that's often a lot of trouble for folks, actually, and what often brings them to therapy is my relationships aren't going so well. So to flip that around, if you start to try to make better connections to help yourself feel more connected with yourself and who you are, and it's not working so well, take that seriously, right? Like, maybe this could be better. I wonder how this could be better. The sense of belonging that I'm missing, how would I find that somewhere? I mean, it speaks to, I think your question was people who find themselves securely attached or who struggle with shame. It's a dis-ease, an unease that's caused by relationships that didn't go so well, that haven't gone so well, current relationships that aren't going so well. And that's kind of the only way, the only place where it can be repaired, right?
Yes, and definitely in human relationships. And, sitting one's back against a tree, the relationship with Mother Nature, that spiritual core. I love the work of Dr. Lisa Miller out of Columbia, The Awakened Brain, and what she's doing to map spirituality, basically, the neuroscience of spirituality. And although the human connections are, of course, really important, and ultimately the healing will come through the relational other, the attuned other, steps can be made with nature by putting one's back against a tree or feeling one's sit bones on the earth, or
going for a walk with one's dog.
Yes, animals, exactly.
Animals
right.
are wonderful, yes.
Yeah, a great
source
sort
of
of
connection.
Yes, this interspecies movement, when humans have failed us so, some of us so greatly, right? That the human to human connection might not be the first thing to turn to, but but nature herself, if she can be seen and understood as a very nurturing source. The ocean, a tree, laying with one's back on the ground, are animals. Yeah. Well, any final thoughts for today?
I would like for shame not to be such a difficult thing for people to talk about. I would like for shame to become a part of our ordinary kind of conversation. There's a deep okayness about being a human being who is fallible and who makes mistakes and who needs to make repairs in life. Like I'm a champion of fallibility and of vulnerability and of us not being able to make anything perfect ever. But then on the other side of that, when you can accept that as a human person, when you know how to manage all of your emotions, including shame, then that chronic shame, that chronic sense of there's something wrong with me, I can't connect with other people, that eases, that diminishes, that can go away. I think that's my kind of final word.
I'm right with you. Let's bring shame out of the shadows. If it needs anything, it needs relationship to be seen, to be felt, to be nurtured, to be guided. And it's part of our humanity. And it is guiding us when it doesn't get locked into that chronic or, toxic phase. So yeah, let's bring it out of the shadows. And thank you so much for joining me and sharing all of your expertise. I deeply appreciate this time together.
No, you're welcome. Thank you. I appreciate being here for sure.
Thank you. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us. You are the reason that we're here, in community, exploring our common unity.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue 7 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine or order a beautiful printed copy.